In the warm, shallow waters of the Indo-Pacific, a creature the size of a dinner plate drifts over a coral reef, almost invisible. To a casual observer, it looks like a patch of seaweed. But then the seaweed moves. Tiny leaf-like flaps ripple along its body, matching the motion of real algae in the current. Even its shape breaks up its outline, confusing the eyes of anything watching from above. This is the Leafy Seadragon, one of the ocean's most convincing illusions. But today, the reef is different. The water is unusually cloudy. The seaweed it imitates is thinning, and visibility is dropping, changing the rules of camouflage in real time. Because mimicry only works when the environment cooperates. So what happens when the background disappears and the disguise stops making sense? Across Earth's oceans, forests, deserts, and underground caves, evolution has produced animals that look and live like nothing else. Some survive through extreme camouflage. Some use unusual hunting tools. Others solve environmental problems in ways that seem almost impossible until you see them up close. These are not myths or exaggerations. Every creature in this documentary is real, and every behavior you'll hear about has been observed by scientists, documented by researchers, or recorded in the wild. In this full documentary, we're exploring the world's weirdest creatures, not as oddities, but as living evidence of how nature adapts to pressure. Because what looks strange to us is often the result of one simple reality. Survival doesn't reward normal. It rewards what works. And as habitats change, through climate shifts, pollution, habitat loss, and human activity, some of these specialized animals face a critical question. Will their strange advantages still protect them, or will the world change faster than they can cope? This documentary is presented for educational and informational purposes only. All content is based on real-world animal behavior, supported by scientific research, ecological studies, and verified observations from reputable wildlife organizations and natural history sources. No information is fabricated, fictionalized, or exaggerated. Before we continue, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to support the channel and help us bring more nature stories to life. Along the southern coasts of Australia, kelp forests form underwater cities. When conditions are right, these forests are dense, towering algae fronds that sway like trees, creating shadows, movement, and constant visual confusion. It's the perfect place for a creature that survives by never being noticed. The leafy seadragon doesn't swim fast. It can't chase prey. It can't defend itself with strong jaws or spines. Even turning quickly is difficult. Instead, it survives by becoming part of the scenery. Its body is covered in delicate, leaf-like appendages that don't help it swim at all. Their job is visual. They break up its silhouette so predators struggle to identify it as an animal. From a distance, it doesn't look like food. It looks like plant life. The sea dragon moves slowly through the kelp, using a small dorsal fin, almost transparent, to glide forward. It feeds by suction, drawing in tiny crustaceans like mysid shrimp. No chase, no fight, just precision. But camouflage has a hidden weakness. For the illusion to work, the habitat has to stay stable. In recent years, parts of these kelp ecosystems have declined due to warming waters, marine heat waves, and shifting conditions that favor different species of algae. In some places, dense kelp forests thin into patchy growth. Open water spaces widen, and the background that once protected the sea dragon becomes unreliable. Now imagine the change from the sea dragon's perspective. A body designed to vanish in a world that's losing the very plants it imitates. As it drifts across a thinner kelp field, its leaf-like flaps still ripple perfectly. It still looks like algae, but there's less algae to match. And out in the open, the silhouette becomes clearer. Above the kelp line, shadows pass, fast-moving fish scanning for shapes that don't belong. The sea dragon continues forward anyway, because it has no other strategy. It can't suddenly become faster. It can't switch to aggression. It has to trust the disguise that evolution built. And then, in the cloudy water, a new shape enters the scene. Close enough now that camouflage might not be enough. Will the leafy sea dragon disappear into the reef one more time? Or has the habitat shifted just far enough to expose it? The leafy sea dragon doesn't react the way many fish would. There's no sudden burst of speed. No sharp turn into deeper water. It continues drifting, slowly, using the same quiet movement it always has, a gentle glide, almost like floating vegetation. This is the strategy. If you're built to disappear, your best chance is to behave like something that doesn't need to escape. The shadow above shifts again, closer now. In open water, predators often rely on outline and motion to identify prey. In thick kelp, that's difficult. But here, where gaps in the forest let in more light, the rules change. The sea dragon angles slightly, letting the current carry it toward a thicker patch of growth. And then, something subtle happens. Its body tone begins to match the environment more closely, an ability documented in sea dragons, which can gradually shift color to blend with kelp and seagrass backgrounds. The transformation isn't instant like an octopus. It's slow, controlled, an adaptation designed for long-term concealment rather than quick escapes. Now the sea dragon reaches the edge of a denser kelp pocket. Here, the leaf-like appendages finally make sense again. They overlap visually with real algae fronds. The outline breaks apart. The animal becomes harder to track. The shadow above hesitates, then glides past. Not because the predator has given up, but because hunting costs energy. If a target becomes uncertain, many hunters shift attention to something easier to identify. For the leafy sea dragon, it's a quiet victory, but also a warning. Because this only worked because some kelp still remained. In parts of Australia, kelp forests have already suffered major losses linked to marine heat waves and warming conditions. A well-studied example is Western Australia, where a prolonged marine heat wave from 2010-2013 severely damaged kelp ecosystems and led to large-scale habitat change. And ecologists continue to warn that kelp forests around Australia, including in the Great Southern Reef region, face growing pressure from climate impacts. If kelp disappears from an area completely, camouflage specialists lose more than cover. They lose identity. Because when you evolve into the habitat, you're also tied to its future. As the leafy sea dragon settles deeper into the kelp, another question takes its place. If the ocean's forests keep thinning, what happens to the animals whose entire survival plan depends on a background that's fading? And in the wider ocean, evolution has produced even more extreme solutions than camouflage alone. In the next chapter, we meet a creature that doesn't just blend in. It becomes something else entirely. Off the coast of Indonesia, near muddy river mouths and silted seabeds, the ocean floor can look almost empty. There are no tall coral towers here, no dense kelp forests, just sand, scattered debris, and shifting sediment, an open landscape with very few places to hide. For many animals, this is one of the hardest habitats to survive in. But for one creature, the lack of cover has become the reason it evolved an entirely different strategy. A pale shape moves across the sand, low to the ground, gliding smoothly, almost like it's floating just above the seabed. At first glance, it looks like a flatfish, but then it changes. The fish lifts itself slightly, and the outline becomes softer, more flexible. Arms are revealed, rearranging like living ribbons. This is the mimic octopus, a species first documented in 1998 in Indonesia and now recognized as one of the most unusual examples of deception in the animal world. Most octopuses are masters of camouflage. They blend into rocks and coral, changing color and skin texture. But the mimic octopus does something more extreme. It doesn't just blend in, it performs. Researchers have observed it imitating multiple different animals, shifting not only appearance, but posture and movement patterns. Among the known mimics, flatfish, lionfish, sea snakes, and jellyfish-like forms. And the reason is simple. In open sand habitats, hiding is limited. If you can't disappear into the background, you may survive by becoming something predators prefer to avoid. One of its most famous performances is the sea snake. The octopus buries 6 arms in the sand and raises 2, banded and moving together like a pair of serpents. Sea snakes are predators themselves, and many animals learn to keep their distance. Then there's the lionfish. The octopus stretches its arms outward in a spiky, radial pattern, resembling the silhouette of a venomous fish. And when speed matters, it can transform into a flatfish, flattening its body, trailing its arms behind, and swimming close to the bottom in the same gliding motion. In one documented observation, a single individual was seen performing flatfish-like mimicry hundreds of times over several days. But this isn't constant costume changing. It's selective. The mimic octopus appears to shift its behavior depending on what's nearby, suggesting it responds to context, the environment, the threat, the distance, and the odds of being targeted. And today, it may need every advantage it has. Because the sand plain isn't quiet. A larger fish patrols the area, close enough now that the octopus's outline could be noticed. In an open habitat, predators don't need to search through shadows. They just scan for movement. The octopus freezes. Not perfectly still. Octopuses still need to breathe and balance, but enough that even subtle motion becomes part of the sea floor's natural drift. Then, without warning, it changes shape again. The arms narrow. The body streamlines. The stripes sharpen. It becomes the sea snake pattern, two banded arms raised, moving with confidence. The predator slows. It circles once, and for a moment, the interaction hangs in the water, uncertain. Because for mimicry to work, the predator must believe the performance. If the disguise fails, the mimic octopus has no shell, no armor, no spine, only speed, ink, and instinct. The predator turns inward. Closer now. The octopus holds the pose, and the question becomes unavoidable. Will this predator accept the illusion or test it? In the shallow tropics, coral reefs can be unexpectedly loud, not because of waves, but because of something hidden inside the reef itself. If you've ever heard recordings from healthy coral ecosystems, there's often a steady crackling in the background, like frying oil or distant static. That sound comes from thousands of tiny animals living in holes, crevices, and coral rubble. And some of them aren't just making noise. They're using physics. In a narrow reef crevice, a small crustacean waits, often only a few centimeters long. It doesn't look like a powerful predator. It doesn't have sharp teeth. It doesn't have speed. But it does have one oversized claw. This is the pistol shrimp, also called the snapping shrimp, famous for a single movement so fast that it changes the water around it. The claw closes with extreme speed, forcing out a jet of water. That jet forms a bubble, and when the bubble collapses, it creates a shock wave. The effect can stun or disorient small prey, often tiny fish or shrimp, long enough for the pistol shrimp to pull it in. And the collapse is loud, so loud that colonies of snapping shrimp can interfere with sonar and underwater communication systems. But the weirdest part is what happens inside that collapsing bubble. Researchers have found that the bubble collapse can briefly produce a flash of light, a phenomenon known as sonoluminescence, and reaches extremely high temperatures for a tiny fraction of a second. In other words, a microscopic event that briefly behaves like a violent energy release underwater. And today, one pistol shrimp is using its reef home like an ambush zone. A small fish approaches the crevice, likely searching for shelter or food among the coral rubble. The shrimp stays hidden, only its antennae and the edges of its claw barely visible. It waits, because the pistol shrimp doesn't chase. It measures distance. When the fish moves into range, the claw snaps shut. There's no visible strike, like a bite. Instead, the water itself becomes the impact. A pulse shoots outward. Sediment jumps from the reef floor. The fish jolts, stunned just long enough that the shrimp can emerge and take hold. To a human watching, it seems impossible that such a small animal can generate such force. But this is the reef, an ecosystem where survival often rewards precision over size. And this isn't just hunting. The pistol shrimp uses its snap for communication, territorial disputes, and defense, turning sound into a multi-purpose tool. Yet even this extraordinary adaptation depends on one thing: the reef itself. Because coral rubble and crevices are not just scenery, they're habitat, they're protection, and they're hunting platforms. If reefs degrade, collapse, or shift into flatter seafloor landscapes, these small specialists lose the architecture they depend on. The snapping continues for now, tiny shock waves firing from hidden chambers. But it raises a bigger question. If the reef structure changes, where does a creature go when its entire way of life depends on cracks and shadows? And deep in another part of the sea, evolution has produced a crustacean even stranger, one that doesn't just use physics. It uses impact. In tropical shallows, coral rubble hides many small predators. But one of the most unusual doesn't hunt with teeth or claws. It hunts with a built-in hammer. A mantis shrimp, often no longer than a human hand, moves between rocks, scanning for movement in cracks and burrows. Its eyes sit high and wide on stalks, giving it a panoramic view of the reef. Then it stops, because it has found something worth targeting, a hard-shelled animal tucked into shelter, protected by one of the strongest natural materials in the sea. For most predators, a shell is the end of the story. For the mantis shrimp, a shell is an obstacle to solve. Some mantis shrimp species are known as smashers. Their front appendages are reinforced into clubs designed for impact. They don't rely on one strike. They rely on repeated, precise force, delivered with one of the fastest movements in the animal world. The strike is so rapid it can create cavitation, vapor bubbles forming in the water due to a sudden drop in pressure. And when those bubbles collapse, they release additional shock waves, adding power to an already extreme impact. This means the mantis shrimp doesn't just hit its target. It hits the water so hard that the water itself becomes part of the strike. Inside a narrow reef gap, the shrimp braces its body, locks its limb into place like a loaded spring, and releases. The club connects. A sharp crack echoes through the rock corridor, not unlike the snap of the pistol shrimp, another cavitation specialist of the reef. The shell shifts slightly, not broken yet, but changed. The mantis shrimp strikes again, and again, not randomly, but with placement that matters. Researchers observing mantis shrimp hunting have documented that they often adjust their strike location based on the shape of a snail shell, shifting tactics when one approach becomes inefficient. This isn't human planning, but it is flexible behavior shaped by survival pressures, repeated trial, feedback, and adjustment. Each strike costs energy. Each strike also makes noise, potentially alerting competitors or attracting animals that investigate disturbance. So the mantis shrimp has to work quickly. It wedges closer, stabilizes, and unloads another rapid sequence. The shell finally shows a fracture line, tiny at first, then spreading. A hard defense system begins to fail, and then something even stranger happens. On impacts like this, the cavitation bubble collapse can create a second hit effect, an additional force after the physical strike itself. In some cases, it's like the target gets struck twice, once by the club and again by the water. The shell gives. The mantis shrimp reaches in. It has access now, not because it is large, but because it carries one of nature's most specialized tools. But this method has limits. Mantis shrimp are built for a world full of hard structures, reefs, rubble zones, rocky burrows. Places where shells are common and hiding spots are everywhere. When reefs degrade, when rubble turns into flat sand, when habitat complexity is lost, these precise hunting advantages lose some of their usefulness. A hammer is most effective when the environment gives you something solid to brace against. And just like the leafy seadragon and the pistol shrimp, the mantis shrimp depends on the architecture of its ecosystem. As it disappears back into its crevice, the reef seems quiet again. But nature doesn't stop producing strange solutions. Because far away from the ocean, underground, there is an animal even more unexpected. A mammal that should not survive in its habitat at all. And yet it does. Beneath the dry soils of East Africa, life runs on a different schedule. Temperatures swing less underground. Light disappears completely. Oxygen can be limited in crowded tunnels. And for most mammals, this would be an exhausting, risky place to live, especially in large groups. But one creature has turned that underground challenge into an entire civilization. A naked mole rat moves through a tunnel no wider than a human wrist, pushing past other bodies in a steady stream. It's nearly hairless, with wrinkled skin, small eyes, and prominent teeth that extend outside its mouth, so it can dig without swallowing dirt. To many people, it looks strange. To nature, it looks perfectly designed. Naked mole rats live in eusocial colonies, an extremely rare system among mammals, where only one female, the queen, breeds, while others take on roles like digging, tunnel maintenance, and caring for the young. This structure is more commonly associated with insects like ants or bees, which makes it one of the most unusual mammal societies on Earth. But their weirdness doesn't stop at social life. Naked mole rats can tolerate low-oxygen environments far better than most mammals, an advantage for crowded burrows. And they show unusual resistance to certain age-related declines compared to similar-sized rodents. making them a major focus of scientific research. Underground, the colony moves like a living machine. Food isn't hunted, it's harvested. They search for large underground tubers and roots, plants that store energy below ground. When they find one, they can feed without destroying it completely, allowing the plant to regrow. It's a survival strategy that fits their dry habitat. Reliable calories, collected close to home, with minimal exposure to surface predators. But the tunnels aren't safe just because they're hidden. A new scent enters the burrow, faint, unfamiliar. The workers freeze. Then the colony shifts into motion. Because in this world, danger doesn't come from the sky. It comes through the walls. One of the naked mole rat's main threats is a specialized predator, snakes that can enter tunnels and hunt in the dark. The mole rats respond collectively, some retreating, others blocking routes, some confronting the intruder with rapid biting attacks. No single naked mole rat is a match for a snake in open ground. But as a colony, inside tunnels they control, they become something else entirely. Coordinated, defensive, difficult to break. The burrow system is their shield. The colony survives not by strength, but by structure, by cooperation, and by an environment they've engineered to fit their limits. Eventually, the danger passes. The tunnels settle, and the colony returns to its steady rhythm. Dig, search, feed, maintain. To us, it may seem unusual, but in nature, it's simply another answer to the same question every species must solve. How do you stay alive long enough to pass on what you are? And the naked mole rat's answer is one of the strangest and most effective ever recorded in a mammal. From kelp forests to coral reefs, from open sand plains to underground tunnel networks, the world's weirdest creatures aren't weird by accident. They're the result of pressures that shaped bodies into tools. A leafy sea dragon built to vanish in living forests of algae. A mimic octopus turning the ocean floor into a stage of survival. A pistol shrimp using sound and water as a weapon. A mantis shrimp striking with speed so extreme it reshapes the sea around it. And a naked mole rat thriving where most mammals would fail by building a life beneath the surface. Each one shows a core truth about the natural world. Evolution doesn't aim for beauty, familiarity, or comfort. It selects what works, even if the result looks unbelievable. But there's another truth running quietly through every chapter. These adaptations are connected to habitats, kelp forests, reefs, seagrass beds, stable soils. When those ecosystems change, even the most specialized survival strategies can become fragile. The weirdest animals on Earth are not just curiosities. They're indicators, living signs of how complex, precise, and vulnerable natural systems can be. And the more we understand them, the more we understand what's at stake. If you enjoyed this journey into the wild, subscribe for more real animal stories. Leave a comment below. What part surprised you most?